episode 23 of Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast examining sound and image-based cultural production and its wider implications. I'm your host, Paula Blair. In this edition, Andrew Shiel and I discuss Deborah Granick's latest film, Leave No Trace. Just a warning, there are mentions of post-combat trauma and suicide due to themes raised in the film. Many thanks to listeners and supporters, and a warm welcome if you're joining us for the first time. You can find more information on what Audiovisual Cultures is all about on the website at audiovisualcultures.wordpress.com. I'll be back at the end to give more details on how you can get in touch and support the podcast. For now, enjoy the discussion. Well, Dr. Shiel, where are we at the moment?
We're in the gallery at the Tyneside Cinema, which is a 3-row, roughly 28-seat screen, the smallest screen at the Tyneside, and it's Wednesday afternoon, and we're rewarding ourselves for masses of hard work with Leave No Trace, which seems to have made Mark cry, so there's the reason we're saying this.
Yes, I listened to his review on the Wittertainment podcast there just earlier today, so it's glowing and emotional. Martin had to stop. He welled up a bit, dear love him. So it's directed by Deborah Granick. She made Winter's Bone, and I remember seeing that in the Queen's Film Theatre in Belfast when it came out.
Which was about 2012, wasn't it?
It was a long time ago, it feels. I feel like it might have been while I was doing my PhD. It was quite a while ago now, but my memories of those rough years are melded into a big mess. I find it really affecting, so I'm very much looking forward to Leave No Trace, and the subject matter just sounds absolutely fascinating. And again, we've been poking at the notions around girlhood quite a bit, and I think a lot of the film is going to be about a teenage girl finding herself and growing up when she's had what we would consider an odd life with her traumatised veteran father in the woods.
I would like to lay £20 as a wager that if you were to do an analysis of films from the last decade made in the US, mainstream and independent, and look at the number of films that concern a young female as a main character, and do that comparison with the teens, you'd find a significant increase between the noughties and the teens. Happily lay money on that. Movie's going to start
shortly, so we'll be back after with our analysis and verdicts. So we're just having a post-movie drink and calm down after Leave No Trace.
The last time we had to have a post-movie drink, we've voluntarily had post-movie drinks, but the last time we had to have it was after Dunkirk, wasn't it? This is
well, alcoholic drinks, but after A Quiet Place we were in medical need of chamomile tea.
Yes, we just needed to make quiet noises after A Quiet Place.
No noise at all.
Yeah, so I suppose, I'll classify the A Quiet Place drink as decompressing of a sort. So, okay, this, A Quiet Place and Dunkirk.
Yeah, I forgot about Dunkirk.
Different sorts of decompression. Leave No Trace, really, that's the devoted ethos of the main character in the film, and it's not a philosophy he's arrived at, it's something he seems to magically have to do. Whatever his condition is, and it's psychological, he's driven to do it.
I like that it doesn't psychologize him, it doesn't over-psychologize anybody, it's just that's how he is, and there are people he and his daughter encounter who understand that that's why he is the way he is. The social service people, it's called, what is it, DFA or something like that. I'm not sure even if that was the agency that it was. They're just doing their jobs, they seem to be very good, but everything is technologised and paperwork, and it's too much, it's overwhelming, and they need them to be part of society. They can't have people being vagrants and living off public land, so it's a massive issue. I was feeling like the whole time they're in the woods, they're living and they're happy and they're healthy and they're fine and they're educated. There are so many nice touches in the film where there's, I think it's a pack of coyotes possibly, when they're in the woods in Oregon. They're batting their tent with books, lots of books they have, and they're banging their books together. So it's a way of showing that they're reading, and they're reading lots of different kinds of literature. So there's little touches like that that show you about their lives, and it's done a lot of the time through the mise-en-scène, through all the elements of the film language.
It was properly cinematic in meaning of the word cinematic. 7, there's a list of like 10 different meanings, where it's show don't tell.
Yes, absolutely.
Lovely. Lots of dwelling on people using things, lots of dwelling on objects, just sitting in places where they're being unused, but there's indications that they were used, usually are. Lots of Thomasin Harcourt Mackenzie, Tom, the main character, and I would call her the main character.
Oh, I would as well, actually, yeah.
Lots of her eyes doing the acting.
She's really amazing,
Even when it was people, it was facial expressions, it was the way in which people use their hands with certain things. There was lots of hands.
Yeah.
Lots of shots of hands in this film.
Yes, there was lots of doing and there was lots of reacting. One of the things that was really pulling at my heartstrings was that characters weren't necessarily saying lots of stuff, but their way of showing love for each other was the clicks, the almost like kissing sounds, but not as trite as that, and not quite clicking your tongue, but something in between.
Well, there was a tiny sliver in there, and I'm assuming since this is an adaptation, one of the things that tends not to get mentioned in these kind of commentaries, but it's an adaptation. I'm assuming that since it's an adaptation, that this probably would have been explored more in the book, but he seems to have an affinity with horses, and that is quite a hoarse noise. Horses tend to react to quite high-pitched noises.
Yes. And she's very close to animals of all kinds. It shows you her having quite an intuition with all of them, and them gaining their trust very easily. So she's doing a lot of bee handling, and it looks like the actress is actually doing a lot of that bee handling herself.
Dogs.
Yeah.
She's in with dogs.
The rabbit.
And the rabbit, yeah. Sometimes when I see films, I think the filmmaker here just wanted to do this thing where they just wanted to introduce you to the oddities and intriguingness of a specific world. I think the little glimpse of that we got in this was rabbit showing. But rather than kind of swanky primping and manicuring the rabbit showing, just simply bringing a well cared for rabbit to some sort of place where other people bring well cared for rabbits and just show them off, and maybe some judging happens, but it's not that important. There was a little bit of that going on. That was one of the things that meant that when father pulled them away from that life to get on the road again, there was a sense of Tom had actually started to put down roots there, and they were meaningful and to do with affinity she had anyway.
She was making friends. As the social worker says, intellectually she's beyond her age already, but she hasn't necessarily learnt any social skills. You don't know how long she's been living in the woods with her father. It seems like most of her so far adolescence, for sure. The social worker points out that school isn't just about learning, it's about building your social skills and being around people your own age and learning how to communicate. She actually does that really well all by herself. She assimilates really well. She adapts to every situation she's in, whereas her father doesn't. And it's fascinating because it's her father that he's trained her so hard. They have the drills where he knows that people will come for them because they're not supposed to be on the public land. He knows that they'll get chased away or they'll get brought back into society, so he drills them in hiding and leaving no trace of their presence, and berates her in a loving way for their footprints are starting to get marked and she's easy for him to see and find, but then it's him who gives it away. He's the one who trips and falls, and then that's a foreshadow for when they get to Washington State after a night of Tom potentially dying of hypothermia because it's so much colder, and she's not physically ready and she's not as physically trained for all of this as he is. And also I think women in general, and especially she's a young woman, she's not fully formed. We don't retain the body heat in the same way that men, generally speaking, can. She doesn't have the body mass that her father has to retain some heat. But they manage to find a cabin, and then the next day he goes off trying to find food. They make a shopping list, and it seems like she waits a whole almost 24 hours. It seems like he didn't really get very far. It shows you him planning on the map. There's a map in the cabin to get to the creek and follow that a certain way, but he seems to have actually fallen before he even got to the creek, and he's been lying there for a long time, quite badly injured and concussed, knocked out. She finds him and manages to get help, so she's resourceful. She's the one who keeps putting down roots.
That was that symbolic switching moment. It was when she achieves a degree of authority by having to be the one in control because he's injured and unconscious.
Yeah.
And that authority involves just leaving that cabin, going and looking for him in the first place when he had said, I'll be back before night, and he wasn't. So that's where she goes to look for him. And then the initiative of going finding people who she can hear off in the distance. She can hear the backfiring of an engine off in the distance, so she goes to find these people to help. And also she takes a bit of initiative in going, when they finally get to someone who's got a phone who can help, saying don't call the phone ambulance. And there's points before that when she has to step up to a task. So there is, for her, there's that stepping up to increasingly greater demands, and then there's that moment where she stepped up so much that she's now effectively in charge.
Yeah, exactly.
He then spends the next, I'd say, about a month convalescing from the injury. During that time, she's free to go and explore the environment, which seems to be we might call it a trailer park. They call it an RV at one point.
It's a mixture of things.
It's a place where you permanently put a trailer of an articulated vehicle, and then you build steps around it, and that becomes a permanent place where you can rent them out
like
to
a little
visitors.
settlement in the woods, and it's people who can't necessarily be part of mainstream society, but they're happy with their own little, very happy society that works for them.
And it's a very serendipitous moment, that part actually.
Absolutely, yeah.
They just go, we're the kind of people who can't live in houses.
But it shows you that they're not on their own, that they're not the only people who cannot live like that, and why should they be forced to?
I suppose what the film does, it gives you all these different levels of people being integrated into the hive of human culture. At one point, when they're in the middle of a city, you get the sense of being right in the middle of that hive. And then their first house is some distance out from Portland, out in a rural community. Yeah. But they're still part of a community, they're still to hive.
He's forced to work as well for the guy who owns the house.
And what they want is just to be well outside the hive, it's just the two of them. And what they end up with is going to a place which is kind of halfway between the rural community where they still have to work and being out in the woods, and it's slightly commune-y. They basically get to live in one of these RVs for free. They're quite lucky with this, with people just saying, you can live here for free.
Yeah, they do happen upon people who will just help them and just have a kind of understanding, almost unspoken understanding of what it is they're going through and what their situation is. I mean, they can see that Tom is in no danger. She's not being abused in any way. She's actually being very well brought up. That's commented upon quite a few times by everybody almost who does help them and brings them into the fold in a way. Because I think these are also people who are not in the fold, so the trucker, who's the transient person, the people who live out in the woods in all the different places. I was thinking as well, it just sounds quite quickly, because in mentioning the man, I can't remember his name, the man who owns the hut they were living in that was near Portland in Oregon.
The guy who owns the tree farm.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name either.
No, because I'll have to look all this stuff up because my computer is not behaving, so I can't turn it on to check this stuff. Yes, I find it really fascinating because he has terms for them staying there. What's the name of the guy? The father.
I didn't catch it.
He does have a name, but
is it ever stated?
I don't think it's said in the film, but he does have a name. Well, he's played by Ben Foster. I remember that much. There are terms for them staying there, so he has to go and work for this guy. Not only that, but they have to go to church one time as well. And I was just thinking that it transpires that the kind of farm this guy has is Christmas tree farm.
Right.
And he's a very Christian person, and it's a very happy clappy sort of church that they go to. But I was just thinking about that tension between his Christian faith and him. Basically, he is the commercialization of Christmas. He's embodying that by growing Christmas trees, which are not at all a symbol of anything to do actually with Christian faith. Pine trees are, I've never understood exactly what they have to do with Jesus being born, but
it's part of the Northern European non-Christian midwinter festival celebrations that has just been drafted into the thing we call Christmas.
He says where he makes his money is with the trees, and they're specifically Christmas trees, and they're being shipped to people in California because they obviously can't grow pine trees there. I think that was just something worth pointing out, and these are things that while Tom is starting to integrate with the people of her generation and animal lovers like her father can't be in his place. I mean, it's understandable they can't be in the house and they sleep out in the garden one time, and that's all fine, but he's put to work in this very commercial enterprise, and it's commercialisation of something that arguably shouldn't really be commercialised, but that's a whole other thing.
The film quite overtly makes the church service that they go to seem varies between mildly ridiculous and quite ridiculous.
Yes.
And afterwards, it's quite clear that the dad's only taking them there in order to just appear to be normal.
Yes.
Like most films that features any representation of religious observance in the US, just quietly goes, that's not our thing. We'll just kind of set it aside. And then what they do find to be their thing is a quasi-socialist commune living out in the woods where people live off the land very much the way they have been doing, but just in a more
legitimate
way.
Itemised way, yeah.
And they have some technology. There's some people who've got phones, but they don't have to have phones.
No.
They keep, the social worker who initially sticks them in a house earlier on in the film tries to give them a phone. You can do without a phone. Although on that, this is the spoiler moment of this podcast, I suppose. The climax of this film is it the climax? The ending of this film, at least, is when Tom just goes, "I'm not coming with you."
Yeah.
And she doesn't even say that. It's just made very clear by her saying, "I understand that you can't stay."
Yeah.
But she doesn't even say, "I know I'm
They
staying."
just know.
Yeah.
That's why it works so well, because it's using the performance of the actors integrated in the film. It's using pure film language almost to communicate these things. Very, very pared back dialogue. There's a scene before that where she says to him, "What's wrong with you is not wrong with me," referring to his post-traumatic stress disorder from being in the army and the things he's probably had to do. And you're not told about that. He can't talk about that. He doesn't talk about that.
The most we get is that at one point she's looking through the sheaf of papers that she knows is important papers, and it includes a newspaper clipping about a Veterans Association of vets who are specifically in Afghanistan. So that would be in the early noughties.
And it was something about the word suicide was in the headline. I took it that it was this unit was stricken with suicide, like the soldiers in that particular unit were prone to suicide or suicide ideation,
after having been demobilised.
And it's possible that he was the only survivor of that. I feel like I've heard that somewhere, and it's possible that that's something that's gone into in the novel that's called My Abandonment.
Totally different time, taking us to a different aspect of the whole story.
Because I think that Leave No Trace in the film, Deborah Granick and the co-writer, whose name's escaping me, they seem to have focused on, I'm guessing they've focused more on Tom and explored her experience in this. I'm guessing, I don't know, I'll check it out, but possibly the novel is from the point of view of the soldier and the father. It'd be interesting to see and compare those. One other thing just quickly what's in my head, because I was noticing, I think you've picked up before about how vegetarianism is represented in films, and it's not clear whether they have to eat to survive, but they never hunt for animals. They're growing food. It's not that they're transient people. They actually have a plot, and they really love the camp that they've settled in, and they mention that they've been there too long because the idea is that they move on so that they don't get caught, but they just really love that spot they were in. It was really working for them, and it showed you that they had their own little tiny farm. They were growing crops, they were picking cloves. She seemed to be an expert mushroom picker. They were living literally off the land. There was no hint of them hunting any animals.
And there didn't appear to be any point when they're eating food which is provided for them, or which is bought from the shop. There didn't seem to be any point there when they were eating something that was definitely meat. There was one point where they took refuge in that cabin in the woods, and they managed to find a few cans of soup there, and one of them seemed to be quite a gravy soup that might have been oxtail, but that's a really tenuous link to something that might have been meat. So,
and it could also have been vegetable soup, vegetable broth or something, because it was just lumps that you couldn't really see clearly going into something that was quite brothy.
And the food of choice, their luxury treat, the kind of thing that they would buy when they had the opportunity, was oranges.
Yes, they
and
had
there was
oranges
lots
a lot.
of peeling oranges. The materiality of trying to get into them was the subject of quite a few shots. That moment when she finally says, I'm staying with these people, I'm going to live here now. That is the equivalent of when your kid goes, right, I'm moving out and I'm going to do this with my life. Except, of course, because of their situation, unless she just permanently stays in that little settlement, they will have no way of finding each other. If he ever wants to see her again, he just has to come back there.
Yeah, exactly.
And she effectively will never be able to find him.
But it sets up the arrangement because Dale, played by Dale Dickey, I think some of the characters actually are named after the people who are playing them. So the character of Dale, who was also in Winter's Bone, there's a part where Tom is helping her with groceries, and they stop because she's packing this sack, and it turns out she's hanging it up for an old man who lived in the woods, and it's possibly the person who occupied the cabin that they'd managed to find. And she says she hadn't seen him for years, but the bag was always empty, and they swapped over the bags. And then it shows Tom doing that kind of arrangement and doing the noise as a sign of affection for her father. And I imagined him collecting the bag and doing the same thing.
Him going, when he picks it up.
Yeah, I just went there in my imagination when I saw that.
Up until that point, when they did that thing with each other, the way the sound would often occur would be one of them would make it in on-screen space, and then it would occur in off-screen space.
Yes.
We wouldn't get the counter shot of the other person making it.
But you hear the reply. It's almost like it's in the off-screen space. Yeah, it does that thing of extending.
Yeah, you get a sense that the diegesis is happening off to the left and off to the right.
It's everywhere. It's a very rich soundscape.
Yeah, and part of that is judicious use of quite emotional orchestral music as well. So I was right at that end bit where she hangs up the bag, and it seems like this is almost certainly going to be the last shot of the film. Hangs up the bag, and it's for this guy who isn't her dad, but hangs up the bag and then makes that noise. Because of the habit up until that point had been he would make the noise in off-screen space. He's not there anymore. And I thought, we're not going to see him, but we're going to hear something from off-screen space. But then, of course, the film went, no, I'm not going to do anything that corny for you.
No, I think
it just gently ended.
Yeah, for me, it just set it up throughout the film and the sentiments there, and I just imagine him coming along, picking up the bag and making the sound in reply. Yeah. So that's how it worked for me.
Significantly less corny viewer response than mine.
Set all of these things up really delicately, and there's so many beautiful payoffs, and they're so subtle. That's the thing, they're really so subtle.
A quick comparison of your and my viewer impression. Just call to mind what age you think Tom is?
I was guessing possibly mid-teens, so no younger than 14, no older than 16. I would guess about 15.
I was thinking 15 as well.
Yeah.
Because you're quite tall.
Quite tall, quite a soft voice, but then, who am I to shock? I'm 33 and I sound about 12. She's very young in the face.
And she's got that adolescent skin as well.
Yes, she does, but such powerful eyes, almost piercing eyes, such incredible acting. And there were times when she would well up because emotions were rising, but there was never any. Her body would be still, she would be calm, and it would just be the redness coming through, and it looked genuine. It didn't look like makeup.
When she needed to be nearly crying, and it's difficult to act nearly crying, right? When she needs to do that, there would be a muscle in her chin that would flutter.
Yes, I know.
You can't act that.
You can't.
That's real. I'm losing control of my jaw.
That's real.
Oh, okay, I'm trying not to, and I am, and I can't. That's
to be able to get there, yeah, it's really impressive. And she's very young as a performer. In a way, it's making me think back to Winter's Bone, because that was Jennifer Lawrence's breakthrough.
The ending to Leave No Trace was a major life moment.
Yeah.
For a very quiet film.
Yeah.
That just followed people doing things very quietly for quite a long time. It actually had, as its crescendo moment, the moment when you, not just the moment when you go, oh, my offspring is flying the nest now, but on top of that, because of the life that he's chosen to lead, it's quite possible that he will never see his daughter ever again.
And they know that.
And that's momentous.
That scene between them has the weight of all of that, because especially with what happened to him the last time he tried to leave, and he aimed to come back, but if she hadn't gone looking for him, he'd have died.
And that thing about the old guy who's living in the woods, and who, what's the name, Gale? Hangs the bag out for. Clear bit of foreshadowing that there's that version of life where it's not just a small group of people living off the grid, it's one person who's effectively a ghost. Because she hasn't, Dale says she hasn't even seen him, this old guy in years. But the bag keeps being empty. This is, I suppose, maybe symbolically, is this Tom burying her father? Because if he's going to become this symbolic ghost, then that shot will we get after they part ways and he's walking off into the woods in Washington State. That's him symbolically dying.
Yes, indeed, and it becomes clear that he has taught her everything he can. There's no more for him to teach her. She's actually become better at him, and that's what you hope for with your children, is that she's become better at him, at the things that he has taught her to do. And so she's a better survivor, she's more careful, she's more conscientious. He's the one that gets caught, he's the one who keeps falling over. She's actually got it down, she actually hid successfully. They didn't know she was there, they didn't even know he was there with anybody else but her.
He had that option actually when they were initially found by the police. He had the option of not saying my daughter's gone.
Yeah, but he probably felt, I can't leave her on her own out here. He had to be honest.
And I suppose looking at the whole thing from his point of view, he's constantly keeping her in tow, even when that means taking her into quite dangerous dangerous
Yes.
environments, like when she nearly freezes to death. He's constantly keeping her in tow because he regards himself as her sole, not just primary, but sole caregiver, and her as being one of the most important things he has to take care of. Which means that what he's doing when they say goodbye is he's saying, this thing I've had for the past 15-ish years, where I have to take care of you, I'm gonna stop doing it. And when you've had a habit of doing something for 15 years, it's difficult. I'm told by people who've had kids growing up. It's one of those things which I think which made Mark cry, and which I think made the guy way off to my right in the front row cry. Well before it even happened, he was doing a lot of crying.
Oh dear. Really, I was welling up quite a bit, but I didn't actually cry. But I didn't realise somebody was
quite upset.
Oh dear.
I think the reason it made Mark cry is because it was tragic from two different.
Yeah, and I think probably if you've got a child, daughter, child, whatever, who is or has been that age, it's going to hit you even harder. Yeah. It's that father-daughter thing.
And it was one of these films that just goes, okay, I'm going to have this thing happen which is both good for this person, but also really quite sad.
It's heart-wrenching at the same time.
And I'm just going to show it to you, and I'm not going to have everyone get into a position where they're happy or they're redeemed in some way, because bad things are almost certainly going to happen to the dad. He's going to become worse off in his relationship with the world because he doesn't have his daughter as a mediation person.
As a focus, because his focus has been teaching her how to do all these things. Again, it gets to a point where he's trying to do them regardless, even though he's trying to light the kindling, even though it's too wet. And she's telling him it's too wet, just stop, we need to use the stove. I don't want you using the gas, but she's like, I'm hungry, I need to eat. She's growing into a woman, she needs to eat. And she just takes charge of it and does it because he keeps banging on with this thing stubbornly. They're never going to eat again because it's too wet.
A theme we're seeing in quite a lot of films these days is men who are in positions of power turning out to be at least just a little bit inept, and in some cases quite inept. And
their young daughter looking after them. Because somewhere, it was Elle Fanning's character, Cleo, wasn't it? Was looking after her dad all the time, cooking for him, making sure he was eating properly. And she was only 11.
She was making eggs Benedict one morning. I think I couldn't make eggs Benedict.
No.
One thing that did strike me is that the thing that seemed to suggest that things are going to be bad for him was that even though it was getting warmer, it was clear that the seasons were passing, he had gone north. When he'd left that place they were living that was well outside of Portland, Oregon, it was clear this is in Oregon, Oregon. And then they hitchhike, get on the truck, and he's asking to go north. And they end up in Washington, and that's Washington State. So that's the northernmost of the west coast states. There's nothing but Washington State between them and the border with Canada. And that means that he's taken them to colder parts of the world, even though they're living outside. And clearly, him having done that, and he also says we're at a higher altitude, him having done that means that their soil is going to be even harder if they continue to live in the woods because they've got north. So he seems to be pushing north because he's trying to get away from the most built-up areas of that part of the States. And if he just continues to do that, then the nature will just kill him.
That's it. And it does show snow lying on parts of the ground, and you can see how cold they are. They're actually starting to get frostbite and things. She's starting to lose feeling in her toes. She's getting cut very easily. It shows you the physical pain and the hardship of it, living in such cold environment.
And I suppose one of the ways in which film can be, in addition to an audio medium and a visual medium, one of the ways in which it can be a tactile medium is by making, or at least trying, to make its viewers feel that empathy for physical sensation that we seem quite good at feeling as mammals. And so just seeing someone cut their hand, that means you just feel a slight ghost pain response yourself. And the more like that person you feel yourself to be, the greater your empathy response is. And there was elements of that there, particularly when that guy who was a retired medic was taking the dad's shoe off. And he went, this is going to hurt. 1, 2, 3. I found myself going, at that point, having a little...
You can imagine it. Especially if you've had a like kind of injury, you're bracing yourself for the memory of the pain or something like that.
Films can do that. At the same time, they can go, here's someone who isn't at all like you and may even not be human because they're a sci-fi character, getting injured, and you feel next to no empathy at all. With this, it was, these people are just like you. Here's them just doing very simple physical things. Here's them cutting up mushrooms.
For me,
you get a sense of being like the characters.
For me, it was when she started to say her boots were leaking, because we've been on long hill walks and my boots have been leaking, and I'm starting to lose feeling in my feet because the cold water's getting in and it's painful. And then it was so touching when they stopped and her feet were red raw. He pulled her feet out and she got some clean socks and stuff, but before that he put them on his bare tummy to get them warmed up, to use his body heat to get circulation going in her feet again, because they were red raw with cold. But then you see her in the next shot, they're tramping along and she's got her feet wrapped in plastic bags to stop the leak coming through to her socks again.
When you're responsible for somebody staying alive, there is a kind of just climb in my pouch thing that tends to go on, because you really don't want someone who you're responsible for keeping alive to just die. I tend to do this whenever I want to help my daughters do anything physical which they might find a bit difficult. Like I might say just climb on my back, and so it's a bit of a kind of chimpanzee thing to do, and that I'm just going to stick your feet up on my back. I'm going to take charge of the heating of your body, and that seems to be in the same ballpark as me. Because I'm physically bigger than you, or because I'm just older than you, then I'm going to pass some of my current state of well-being onto you in whatever way I can.
But I was even imagining how difficult it must be for her to walk with the plastic bags. So I've imagined her feet slipping more and them getting caught on. Yeah, anyway, so I just imagine I had real empathy for her in that sense. And you know I can't cope with my feet being cold, and they're cold most of the time.
Are they cold now?
Not just this minute, because it's a very hot day.
I think for bits of June and bits of July you're not cold, and then that's about it.
And then most of the rest of the year my default is freezing.
When they were cold and they found that cabin and they lit the fire, I felt myself going, oh, that's nice.
That's a relief.
Nice and toasty.
I could almost feel that pain of when freezing cold hands with fingers so stiff you can barely move them, the pain of them heating up and the tingling sensation, but it being actually quite painful. You actually need to warm up slowly, because it's a very painful thing to change temperature very quickly. If I think of anything useful to say, or we think of anything useful to say about the film, we will do, but I really loved it. I really recommend it. I really recommend seeing Winter's Bone at some point. It's a much bleaker film, but it's so well made. I'll correct myself later on if I'm wrong, but I think that was Deborah Connick's directorial debut, Winter's Bone. I think she's one of the filmmakers, she doesn't make stuff very often because it takes a long time to get a project up and running and funded and that sort of thing. I think she's incredible. I'm really just so pleased to have seen this, and thank you for coming with me to see it.
Pleasure. We're on a good streak at the moment. We've just gushed about everything we've seen recently, so should we just go and see something awful next time?
Before closing, I just want to add further points briefly that came up after we finished recording. Andrew wondered if the film could be regarded as anti-war, and while I think that reading can certainly be made, given the conversations that Will, who's played by Ben Foster, has with veterans who've made Camp in the Woods as well, the conversations that he has about their medication, and I think the film is perhaps a quiet criticism of how veterans are treated and the lack of mental health care provision needed for deeply traumatised former soldiers. When Will and Tom find the small commune in Washington State, the former army medic who treats Will explains it's been his dog who's helped him with his nightmares. The film indirectly shows the God-fearing Mr. Walters, who doesn't spare a thought for Will's needs or his request to work with horses, but instead puts him to hard labour that requires having to work with machines and helicopters, and it's the noises of these things that are triggering Will's worst anxieties. Judging by the way Will crouches, hugging himself, while the oppressive rotors overwhelm the soundscape and the frame closing in around him, he's likely experiencing flashbacks and panic attacks, but this isn't the kind of film that would show you those things and be overt about that. You just have to imagine that that's probably what he's going through. And while Mr. Walters claims to want to help, and that's why he provides the shelter for them in the first instance. His help comes at a dear price for Will's well-being. Will's untreated condition, and although he receives medication, it's made clear from several characters throughout the film that the medication is ineffective. They still have the nightmares regardless of the pills. There's just this unspoken sense of possibly the state just trying to medicate away the problem and hide it in that way to just make it not be so much of a problem anymore, and it pushes these people out to the periphery of society. They cannot integrate again. He manages through Tom's ingenuity to find a way to live that is more workable for him, even if it means their separation, to ensure her survival and allow her to live a life that's something in between society and the loneliest of peripheral reaches. She's in a tiny microcosm of society, but it's one that seems to be conducive to the way she needs to live, certainly as a transition as a young woman. And Tom is very much enabled by others and then can operate independently. Examples include when Will helps her ride a bike for the first time, and when she's taught to handle the bees, and when she's then taught to handle the rabbit, and so on. And just finally, a quick note on the adaptation. I had a quick look up about it. It's titled My Abandonment by Peter Rock, and it's based on apparently a true story, and the narrator of the novel is a 13-year-old girl called Caroline. So I'm not sure if Thomasin Harcourt Mackenzie, who plays Tom, I don't know if she was 13 when this was filmed. She could feasibly be 13. She's at that awkward stage of adolescence where she's looking very grown up but very young in the face at the same time. Caroline is the narrator of the novel. I'll put some links to this kind of thing in the show notes that are available for anyone who pledges on Patreon. I hope you found this discussion interesting or useful in some way, and if you have, please do consider supporting us via Patreon. I'm also very grateful for one-off donations to paypal.me/PEA Blair. And if you'd like to make suggestions for future topics and participate in recordings, you can reach us on audiovisualcultures@gmail.com and on Twitter @avcultures. Thanks so much for listening, and catch you next time.